Today we're going to review the brand new Wilson E-Zone V5. Sorry, the brand new Wilson Ultra V5. This looks nothing like an E-Zone. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So the Ultra V4 was one of the last rackets that came out before I started doing reviews, so I didn't really talk about it all that much, but they improved it pretty significantly compared to the V3. I didn't spend a ton of time on court with it because this isn't exactly my favorite style of frame, but I was pretty excited to give this line another shot with the V5. I also wanted to make this review a little bit different and try to spice things up a bit. I filmed some footage of me running through my initial impressions when I saw it for the first time and then talked a little bit about it while I strung it up for the first time. Hopefully you enjoy this. If you do, please drop a like on the video. We're gonna cut to me in the store now, and I guess this will be the first time, at least for a lot of you, that you actually see the inside of the store. And of course, remember that with any of the rackets that I talk about on this channel, you can check them out either in store or on our website, racketsandrunners.ca.
All right, so I got the new Wilson Ultra V5 here today. Also managed to snag an old V4 demo. I'm gonna go ahead and string these up the exact same way so I can test, the playability differences here. I haven't actually checked the tech specs or the new technology going on inside this racket. From what I can tell, the mold is pretty much identical. Yeah, no major change like there was with the previous one. We're gonna string these up and take them out for a hit tomorrow. Now, there is one thing I just want to point out is, I don't know if you noticed this, but the paint job on this racket is about as similar to the E-Zone as one could get. Now, it is a little bit different. This blue is more royal blue, and this is more, I think, periwinkle is what I called it in the review. But yeah, pretty similar paint jobs. Now for the strings, I actually just strung up a Pure Drive with Solinco Mach 10, which I really want to try in that racket. And obviously, Ultra and Pure Drive are similar, so I think I'm going to do the same thing. Mach 10, 1.25, 16L. Now, in terms of my history with the Wilson Ultra, I haven't always been the biggest fan of this racket. Not a big power rackets guy in general, other than Pure Drive, which I like a lot. But I did really like that on the previous one, the big point of emphasis was making it much more spin friendly. I think that separated it from the Pure Drive a little bit more, because it was definitely a much more spin friendly racket than the Pure Drive. Almost to the point where it's like a hybrid spin and power racket. And like I said, I don't see a ton of physical changes here. Like the mold's the same, the grommets are the same, everything I can tell is the same. I'll test the specs out a little bit later once I do have it strung.
Now, despite what I said about nothing physically changing with the racket's profile, Wilson do claim they've made some geometrical changes to this Ultra. I've looked at the frame pretty extensively and I can't personally see any, so I think they're probably talking about how they've actually laid up the carbon, and they are definitely claiming some technological changes. We know Wilson, they love exploring with new layup technologies, and on this new Ultra, they've added their SI 3D tech, which they already put in the Clash, and it's designed to optimize three-dimensional frame bending for power, spin, and control. In terms of the words they use to market it, SI3D sounds a lot like the vertical bending technology they first introduced in the Shift, so one of the characteristics I was most curious to hone in on was spin. That was already one of the big improvements they made to the racket last generation. They made it really spin friendly, so if they've tried to further amplify that, that's probably a good thing, especially if they're looking to separate it even more from the Pure Drive.
All right, so that is the Ultra strung. Just gonna quickly string up the previous one the exact same way, and then we'll go test out the spec differences on the diagnostic machine. All right, so Ultra V4, Ultra V5 strung the exact same way, Mach 10 16L at 53 pounds. Got an overgrip on both of these. I am going to test them on the Biardo Tune Pro here, especially for flex and swing weight, because those are the two things that are probably the only things that changed. The rest of the specs I think are pretty much the same. So I'm going to check the swing weight of the previous one here. Now I'm not going to be drawing too many conclusions from target swing weight based off of one demo and one sample, because there could be a lot of variance there. But previous one is swinging at 311. Okay. And this new one guessing is going to be a little higher, but 319. Okay, so I mean that's 8 swing weight points difference. That's pretty significant. Whether that's on purpose or not, I'll kind of do a little bit more research to figure out. But yeah, it's a pretty big difference. Obviously, that's going to help with a little bit more power and plow through and stability and all that. So now let's check the stiffness, which is what I'm really curious about.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so I'm going to test the previous one first. 67 strung. All right, let's check it out. 65. All right, 2 points softer. Not the biggest change, but definitely worth noting. And that's a used V4 versus a pretty much brand new V5. So this might even be a little bit softer than it was stock. But yeah, that's about it for the stringing, the specs test and all that. Now we're going to take them out to the court.
So yeah, after testing a few more ultras, they've pretty clearly raised the target swing weight. You saw this one was swinging at 319, and on average, they're all right around there between 316 and 320. The stiffness has also gone down by about 2 points to 65 strung, and the rest of the specs are identical. This is a 100 square inch racket with a 16 by 19 string pattern. It weighs 300 grams, and it has a 24, 26.5, and 24.25 millimeter beam. So there's definitely been a major update to this racket's feel, and it's actually pretty interesting because I already thought the previous one was a lot more plush and sort of clashy compared to the V3, but this is another huge step in that direction. The feel on impact is much, much softer. Not in a flexible or noodly type of way like what you'd expect from a control racket, but whatever increased frame pocketing they've looked to create with that SI 3D technology is 100% there. This is a remarkably plush racket, especially when you consider that it's still flexing at 65 RA strung, which is definitely far from soft, but compared directly to the V4, this is much more jarring and sort of tinny. It's especially noticeable outside the sweet spot. You can feel the outsides of the hoop still working to pocket the ball to be more forgiving, and while I haven't always been the biggest fan of these Wilson kind of mushier technologies, I actually think it works really well in this racket. The previous Ultra definitely didn't have the most connected feel, and I don't think any Ultra ever will, so softening it up and making it feel so much more solid and comfortable is definitely a good thing here. It does feel mushy, but because it's stiff and mushy, it doesn't feel as pillowy and undefined as something like the Clash. There's still that element of crispness you want from your power racket. This also makes it much more comfortable than the previous version, and not just when you make contact in the sweet spot, also on off-center hits, again, because it's not quite as jarring. I'm really happy with this update. It's not necessarily a racket I'd ever consider switching to because that feel isn't something I personally love, but it's an update that's definitely going to make it more popular and work for a wider variety of players. It's not just for ball feel that this technology has improved this racket's playability. Remember, they use similar language in the marketing for this racket that they used in the Shift. So now I want to talk about spin because its spin profile is very interesting. The major update they made on the V4 compared to the V3 was definitely in the feel department, but one of the things that flew under the radar was just how much more spin-friendly this racket had become as well. They've taken that a step farther with the V5, and I think that's a good thing for this racket's identity to make it stand out compared to those best-selling powerhouses that are the E-Zone 100 and the Pure Drive. This new layup has a lot of that shift feel to it, where it pockets the ball really nicely when you hit with that modern spinny technique. It's not quite as intense, but there's a similar sensation of the ball sinking deep into the strings and springing out with more spin than what would be natural without any tech. I really enjoyed hitting ground strokes where I adapted my technique to focus on really spinning the ball, which is a similar thing that I did when I started to mesh with the Shift the first time I tested it. This amount of spin actually puts this racket firmly into the spin rackets category, which again is really impressive and not something I can say about, for example, a racket like the Pure Drive. When I was testing these side by side, it was much harder to get easy RPMs on the ball with the Pure Drive, and that's not really a slight on the Pure Drive, it's more just an example I wanted to use to compare it and explain the Ultra spin profile. Unfortunately, I didn't have the E-Zone 100 with me for the playtest, but I do find this Ultra more spin friendly. The E-Zone swings through the air more like a spin racket because of the beam and the whippy feel that creates, but this has more actual spin on contact. Now, a little bit more about how this racket swings through the air. That is one of the slight imbalances I found in its playability. This really isn't aerodynamically optimized in any way. Especially in the throat here, it's a thick beam and very power oriented in its design, so there's no acceleration through your stroke, which considering most other spin rackets have that arrow design, this is a little bit weird. To feel this much spin on contact without it being very quick through the air is definitely unique, but if you want the potential for spin without that arrow design, then this is actually a really good option. The other thing that impressed me is that this racket generates a lot of spin without being really launchy in any way. I'll talk about power more in a second, but this doesn't spray the ball the way some other rackets that are this spin friendly sometimes do. That's again a testament to this technology amplifying the spin rather than something like really wide spin grommets or a really open string bed. If anything, this is a surprisingly solid racket on contact, not in a traditional high swing weight, super crisp, super well defined type of way, but in that unique plush, spinny, and clearly very well technologically developed type of way. Talking about control in a power racket is always kind of funny because these rackets have basically no traditional control, but one of the rackets I've been really enjoying hitting with recently is the Pure Drive. This is a racket I find super solid and actually very consistent, so you definitely can control the ball with these types of frames. Because this new Ultra is plush, it's a little bit mushy, and it has a really big and forgiving sweet spot, it's not super precise, you're not going to be guiding the ball perfectly onto the lines with this thing, but it is actually quite solid. It's funny because if you'd told me before it launched that it was going to be mushier like the Clash, I would have thought, okay, it's probably going to sacrifice control for that more forgiving feel, but I actually think it's the opposite here. This technology opens up the sweet spot, but it also makes it much more stable even when you do make good contact. The previous Ultra is more stiff and jarring and definitely sprays the ball more, and because this does have that softer feel, you also have a bit more dwell time to control the ball. But the real big thing here is that now that spin has improved so much, spin is even more effective to help control the ball. You don't really want to be pinging flat, powerful shots all over the place with this Ultra, which is something I think the Pure Drive is really good at. But if you do swing fast and focus on generating spin, you'll have really good depth control. Now for any other type of control shot, whether it's drop shots, slices, or even volleys, this definitely isn't the best performing racket. This stabilization technology is something that works quite well when you're generating pace, but when you're trying to block pace with a volley up at the net, it's not as effective as extra weight is, and this racket also does not have that pinpoint precision up there. So don't get the Ultra thinking it's going to be a fantastic control stick. It's not got that variety in the control game, but it's not a random racket, which is sometimes a criticism I have for these more power and spin oriented frames. Now let's talk about power, because the Ultra is marketed as a power racket, but it's a little bit unique in its power profile and not necessarily in a good way if you're an advanced player looking for a lot of put-away power. This racket pretty much perfectly represents how different the two types of power are in tennis, those two types being easy access to depth on one hand and top end power on the other. Easy depth is what makes a racket easier to use, especially for more beginner and intermediate players who don't necessarily have a full stroke and want some help getting the ball over the net. In that regard, the Ultra is elite, and especially with the updates they've made, expanding the sweet spot, this is a super forgiving racket. You don't have to make perfect contact every time, and it does help push the ball pretty deep. The problem here, and why I don't think it's ever going to be as popular as the Pure Drive and the E-Zone 100 for big hitters, is that it really does lack some punch and big hitting potential. I can't tell you exactly why, but it just feels like something's holding it back from really getting a hold of the ball. Part of that is this plusher layup technology, but I already had that issue on the V4, which didn't have this same feel. I think when Wilson was designing this frame, they consciously sacrificed a bit of that big power potential in exchange for making it super forgiving, pretty consistent, and also very spin friendly, which is totally fine because that's what makes this an easy racket, but more advanced players may want a little bit more. I wasn't at my best level when I was testing it. I wasn't moving super freely and I couldn't really explode into my forehand, but when I did press on the gas, I could still feel that it was just a little bit lacking. That lack of big power potential also means it's not going to be one of those big serving power rackets. I definitely wanted a little bit more oomph on my first serve when I was testing it. It has improved from the previous one, but I think that's more due to the higher swing weight rather than anything else Wilson has changed. You could always add a bit of weight up in the hoop to boost plow through even more, but that won't magically transform the racket. The Pure Drive will always hit bigger, so I do think it's a little bit more geared towards advanced players, but with the updates they've made here, I might actually be more inclined to recommend this racket to intermediates than I would the Pure Drive. The Ultra is a pretty unique stick that I don't think is going to totally revolutionize the tennis industry this time around, but it does fill an important niche. Think of this like a blend of a traditional power racket and a Clash. It's not got as high of a ceiling as some of the best power rackets, but it's also not nearly as flimsy and uncontrollable as the Clash. It's also more comfortable than most power rackets, and the big point of emphasis is that it's easy in almost every sense of the word. It's easy to generate depth, it's easy to generate spin, it's easy to control, and what that means is that it's pretty much the perfect racket for slightly lower level players who are starting to develop a full stroke. It responds well to a wide variety of shots, it just doesn't have that one really magical element to it, and I think a lot of advanced players do want a racket that has some sort of magical characteristic. I also think the updates Wilson have made have been really good. That's what's made it easier in almost every way, but it still has some of that crisp feel you want from your power racket. I don't think it's a racket that I'm going to add into my personal lineup, but I do think it's a racket that can be perfect for a lot of players out there. With that said, that is going to be the end of this review. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, if you do want to demo the brand new Ultra V5, you can come visit us in store, or if you want to buy it, you can go online at racketsandrunners.ca.